everyone. I'm Suman, CEO and co-founder of Marco, and super excited to have Mac all the way from Copenhagen here, CEO of Commsor. And we were just joking. We could probably record a few of these episodes based on where the conversation goes. But I guess let's start it off and share kind of what Commsor is. We'll start with that.
I was saying earlier, it's like kind of a hard question to answer right now because we're in the middle of kind of like shaping it a bit. But we started as a community-led growth platform. So we were kind of at the forefront, I think, of a lot of the community-led growth conversation the last 3-4 years. And there's a whole rabbit hole on that on its own. And over the last few months, we've been shifting to this idea. Like the building blocks are the same, the principles are the same, but now we call it a go-to-network platform. Yeah. And that's a totally separate rabbit hole we could go down. But that is the gist. It's really this idea that, especially for B2B companies, like direct go-to-market, it's not dead, but the trend line is in a very specific direction, right? Like cold calls, cold emails, direct ads, third-party data. Totally. It's like they don't work the way they worked 3 years ago or 5 years ago. And, like you can just like block cold calls on your phone now, and people block their inboxes and ad blockers and things like that. So originally it was like community as a growth mechanism for software companies. And go-to-network is really like a broadening of that definition where like there isn't just like a single community around companies. There's like all these different overlapping networks. Some might be called communities, some might not be. And that's the world that we are playing in.
So you're building a go-to-network company.
Yes.
So I guess just for context, this podcast is around turning companies into communities and perhaps communities and networks. There's even a broader kind of view of this. And we're interviewing folks like heads of people, just people who are passionate about community and also kind of, in your case, founders. And so before we get into like company stuff and, what community means to you, your company journey, how that applies to, sales or marketing or whatever it is, maybe we just start with like a little bit about kind of you as a human being, kind of like, you're from Europe, but you sound...
Well, I'm from the U.S. Live in Europe now.
Exactly.
My mom's half Danish, so it's not like totally random. But I don't know, 2 years ago, after like early New York pandemic, woke up one day and was like, "Fuck, I gotta get out of here," and just like kind of moved on a whim. But background-wise, I guess I don't know. I started my first company when I was 17. Ended up, classic dropping out of college and doing that. It was actually built around Minecraft. There was a huge community component to that. Basically using Minecraft as a game engine and then creating a server where players could come together and play the custom content we had created. And I never called it community at that time. I never really thought of myself as a community builder. And then I got lucky enough to exit that business. And in that kind of, I don't know, those 6 months post-exit where you're like, what am I doing?
Wait, how old were you when you exited?
22, 23.
Okay.
And it was bootstrapped to about 14 people. So by bootstrapping standards, I didn't have college debt, great success. By VC standards, a non-existent drop in the bucket. But when I took that kind of step back from the business, that's when the community thing kind of sunk in, when I realized of all the hats I'd worn, the community part was what I enjoyed the most. The community part had been one of the unique things that made the business actually work. And that kind of got me down the path of thinking about community intentionally, which, a hop and a skip, 4 or 5 years later, led to Commsor.
Got it. And what did you do during this 4 or 5 years? I guess personally or professionally?
Started, probably 9 different companies.
Really?
So classic, like one success and maybe hopefully one more success. On the other end. But it's, I started, I had a small company making like indie video games that never went anywhere. I ran a small like clothing label for a short while that it's a hard business to work.
I guess that's a
Thank you. It was did that and then had a bunch of like micro software, was deep in the bootstrapping, kind of like micro software where I had like, I had one little software making $1,000 a month, another one making $3,000 a month. So like not big things. And then when I started Commsor, I was a side project. It was a hackathon entry originally. And it was, it was a product hunt, had a no code hackathon about 4 years ago. And I think we got got like 52nd out of 58 entries. Did not do well, but just kept tinkering on it. And it just kind of naturally, honestly kind of fell into what it is today.
Yeah. So maybe talk about what Commsor was and how that's evolved. And if you could touch on, we were just talking about kind of the craziness of venture capital and maybe like a little bit about the company story would be helpful, I feel like.
Yeah. So I guess, as I said, it started as a no-code hackathon entry. It was originally called Commsor, which is where the Commsor name comes from, just kind of like squashing that together.
Yeah. Where does the dinosaur come from, by the way? Because your logo.
That's so.
Maybe we'll get to that.
So
Maybe we'll get to that.
started as Commsor, and we were actually helping independent communities connect with companies for partnership opportunities. So like community sponsors, where the name came from originally. And the no-code version was like a glorified Airtable spreadsheet with a Webflow front end. It was nothing very fancy. And basically, we realized that it was very hard for these communities to understand themselves enough to like sell themselves to companies. So we started building an analytics tool to help these communities have data to sell to the companies, to be like, just like when you go and book an influencer, you want to know what their demographics are.
So give you an example for this?
So we worked with like Microsoft wanted to sponsor a bunch of developer communities in New York because they were trying to like hire younger developers or something. I can't remember exactly what it was. So like they actually like worked with us to kind of get their message into these communities, these independent meetups or Slack groups or Discord groups or things like that. What else did we do? So many things. It's like 4 years ago. It feels like it's a decade ago, right? It's
startup years.
Chaotic. So we started building this data platform that we were going to give to communities for free to make them more valuable on our marketplace. And then companies started going, hey, like this sponsorship thing is kind of cool, but can we just like have that data tool for our own community? And it was like, oh shit, like, yeah, it's a lot easier to sell a company on a software subscription than to like try and build a marketplace where these independent communities are all different and run by people that like some are commercially motivated, some are not. So we kind of shifted to building this community analytics tool. Originally, we called it a community CRM. Then it became a community-led growth platform. And the idea was really helping companies embed community into their go-to-market process. So making community like an intentional part of how they grow. And we did that for, I guess, until technically, March this year. And now we are pivoting into this go-to-network principle that I touched on earlier.
Yeah, and like, what does go-to-market mean, and how do you think it's traditionally been done? You touched on this around like cold calling, cold emailing.
So I'm like very specifically focused on B2B.
Yeah.
And it's been direct go-to-market for the most part, right? It's cold calling, cold emailing, direct ads, buy third-party data. There's been a little bit of rise of like PLG and whatnot. And if you read LinkedIn, it sounds like PLG is like the end-all be-all, but it's actually still very small in the B2B space. Partnerships are taking on a bigger role at companies. So go-to-market is like this. I always call it direct go-to-market. And then go-to-network is really this idea of like you're building a network around yourself of community members, champions, partners, advisors, creators, influencers that you can get to the market through them. So it's like a warmer way to get to the market.
So in the context of, let's just take an example, maybe your company. So go to network, you have your kind of network of perhaps like partners, customers, investors. How might you use a tool to like leverage that network to sell?
So a lot of it is like, I guess the tool we're building on one half is tools to actually like manage that network. Yeah. Because like if you think about like if you actually want to have a network that's worth activating, you have to actually invest in building a network, right? It's like community building. It doesn't just like show up.
Yeah.
You have to put the work in to build a thing that's going to return results. So on one half it's that. On the other half, it's almost like if you think about a CRM, right? If I want to sell to you, it's like I want to sell to this person. So I have person at company and there's like a single line. I'm like, I'm going to try to sell to that person. And most companies are like, cool, hit them with a cold email, hit them with a targeted ad, hit them with a cold call. What we're doing more is mapping the entire network of relationships. So it's like, okay, I want to sell to this company. Oh, this coworker used to work there, or oh, we share an investor, or this customer of ours is also a customer of theirs. So it's like identifying all these paths to get in touch with potential buyers instead of just trying to batter their door down.
Can I just give you a personal example? It's so funny. So Marco helps companies connect their people through experiences, events, right? So we'll sell like a one-off event, like a company offsite.
Yeah.
But what we're doing more so now is like, well, how do you think about your overall kind of connection strategy? Because now you're spending a lot of money on that stuff. Your people are distributed. And so I now will hit up my friend who works at a company and then just learn, right? Discover, and then build their trust, even though they might trust. And then I think I'm just personally reacting and reflecting because I'm like, that's just a better way. Because then you're actually understanding and discovering. And then when you get to the person who's perhaps the buyer, they give a shit about what you're talking about. You've done
versus just like picking up the phone and being like, hey, you want to buy? And it's like, who the fuck are you?
Yeah. And you're trying to craft a cold email to get their attention when they probably, especially if they're senior, they get a lot of those and they go right to the spam folder.
I don't know about you, but my inbox is a hellscape. It is unusable.
Yeah. Yeah, and then you can actually be like, okay, cool, I understand what you're up to, and then these 5 people can be advocates.
Yeah, it's
Is
basically
that,
like
so
building.
am I
It's
understanding that?
basically building real relationships before you sell.
So you're creating a productized way to build real relationships before you sell.
Essentially, it's like build them, manage them, understand them, and then identify and map them. It's like all those different steps wrapped into one.
Got it.
And community can and should be one of the ways you build that network.
Yeah.
But the shift from our old product is that's not the only way we talk about it anymore.
Well, so let's just even take a step back and like, what is community in the business context?
Man, if I had $1 for every time I've answered that question in the last 4 years, like
so
every time we
that.
spoke to investors, like, what do you mean by community? I mean, obviously, it's definable in like a dictionary sense, obviously, and the dictionary is like it's like a bunch of people coming together over a shared purpose or a shared identity. But from a business perspective, I think trying to define it actually hurts it. And I think there's been a lot of that. I've seen that so much. Like I've been at the center of the community industry for the last few years, and people are like, there's so much like borderline argument about what is community, what isn't community. Some people are like, social media is community. No, social media is not community. Like this is community. Like, no, it's like instead of like just agreeing that it is this open-ended, fuzzy term that means different things to different people and it manifests in different ways, right? Community for Mr. Beast as an influencer is very different than community for Salesforce as a B2B company. And there's a whole range of spectrum in between there, which also makes it hard to not only define, but give people advice on community. I get all the time like, oh, I want to start a community. What should I do? It's like,
I think I've asked you for advice.
Like, it depends. Like, that's like saying, I want to build a product. How do I do it? You're like, what kind of product? Who's it for? Why are you building it? Because a community is kind of a product in a way. It's like if you look at like a lean framework for building a product or like an MVP framework, replace the word product with community, replace the word customer with member, and it's like same principles apply. So I think community is I don't know how to define it. It's like I don't know. It's like asking them to define product market fit. It's like there's a little bit of exactly. There's like an element of like a feeling to it. Yeah, which is also what makes it so hard. Like our old product was like trying to turn community into numbers. Yeah, which is it's partially possible, but it's not totally possible. And that's also why I think a lot of companies are afraid of community as a strategy because it's not completely measurable. I can measure. I made 100 cold calls. 3 of them worked. Great. If I now do 3,000 cold calls, I will get X lead. Like you can just like measure it. Community it's not linear. It's not measurable exactly in that way. There's definitely things you can measure, but it's very open-ended and hard to define. No,
that makes a lot of sense. I'll just share a story about Marco. So I find we kind of we're building a very nascent community around people leaders. And what I found is you need to, and I was doing a little research and hearing about kind of your own Commsor community, which I think is and probably was a great asset to your company. Absolutely. But I feel like it has to be intentional and not salesy. And it's kind of like some of it is a long game, right? Which is like you're actually building trust with these people, and hopefully you're solving a solution that works for them. But you need to actually nurture it and provide value for it. And I know that you did this with Commsor. It was actually independent. My understanding is independent of Commsor. And that might drive, but you can't be like, cool, that's going to fill up our top of funnel. And then we're going to go sell to all these people. Because then they're going to get out of the community, right? They're going to be like, you need to actually provide value to them and a vessel to them, perhaps. Is that like,
it has to be, it has to be like symbiotic, right? Yeah. It's like there's value for the company and value for the member. My favorite example, I remember it's like probably 3 years ago, 2 years ago, there was a whole host of companies that started buying communities. There was like sales, Outreach bought Sales Hacker, Stripe bought Indie Hacker, Zapier bought MakerPad. There was like 8 or 9 like pretty big examples. I remember. Did
any of them work?
Well, so I remember a lot of people being like, "This is going to happen more and more." The problem was companies bought them and were like, "Oh, it's a lead list." Like, "Oh, I want to sell to salespeople. I'm going to buy a community of 5,000 salespeople. Boom, I can sell to 5,000 salespeople right now." And in the short term, like that might have worked, but it destroyed the very thing that made the community long term. And a whole host of those communities have now been sold back to the original founders for pennies on the dollar for what they were bought for. It's like like there's like Sales Hacker. Outreach bought them. I want to say it was like $5 or $6 million, and it was sold back for. It wasn't public, but for I've heard less than $200,000.
Well, not to bring up Barstool Sports, but I don't know.
Same exact thing, right? It's like there was like 10% or less of what they were sold for. They got bought back for.
I think Dave Portnoy bought it back for $1. I think he sold it for hundreds of millions of dollars.
That's like as a community is like once again because it's not just a numbers game. There is this like as cheesy as it sounds, this like vibe, this feeling, this thing that is like sort of intangible, that if you don't get what makes a community tick, and it's a different answer for every community, which is also what makes it hard, you can't just show up and just like extract value out of it.
Totally. You can't. And I think you have to authentically want to create the community and have a reason for it to exist. Maybe let's talk about Lattice. Are you familiar with Lattice? My understanding of Lattice is obviously Sam Altman's brother, Jack Altman, right?
Yeah.
So he talks about how he basically, instead of going like heavy on paid ads or whatever it is for Lattice is an HR software tool, and they
have a huge community.
Yeah, so
they were one of our first customers for our old product.
It's not performance review. They do kind of like employee surveying, essentially.
Yeah, they're like employee. I don't know what
sentiment.
Call it.
Employee survey.
Yeah,
and I think they might be going into maybe like HRIS.
Like every company, they're going as wide as they can.
but point I'm making though is Lattice culture, but Lattice has an amazing, thriving community. And my understanding was Jack was intentional about that from the beginning, and he created this.
You can tell.
Yeah. And so, have you ever talked to Jack about that, or do you?
He's transparently a small investor in us, actually.
Oh, really?
But yeah, they were like a beta customer of the first version of our product years ago.
Really?
Yeah. And it's, last I checked, I think they had like 20,000 active members in there. Which, like, just think about that from a perspective. If you're a founder or a salesperson or a marketer, like, what would you do to have 20,000 of your ideal buyers in a place that you control, where you can have conversations with them, where you can warm them, where you can be authentic with them? That's like the biggest cheat code to growth of all time.
But I think the cheat code was that he didn't try to like monetize it immediately. Yeah. He created a space for people to connect.
Well, it's like the monetization just kind of falls out of it, right? Like you're building. It's like Airbnb talking about how like they're like, we don't do ads anymore, we just do brand. It's like, it's not perfect to measure, but like you just build a good brand, like people just come to you.
Well, this is a good segue actually for our community. So we do these community catalyst events, right, with heads of people. We actually don't even talk about Marco. The funniest part is like we've had people literally talk afterwards, and the whole concept is like people leaders have gone through a ton of shit essentially, and now their roles have expanded. It's been super stressful, and they often don't get the love or the space to kind of like talk about themselves as people, right? Being a leader as well as specifically a people leader. And so we had this guy, Mark Levy, who was the first guest on our podcast. He's now an advisor at Marco. And he was the global head of employee experience at Airbnb. So he was the head of people at Airbnb. And he talks about, belonging was their mission, how to create a place where everyone can belong. And then connection was connection between company and employees, employees and employees, employees to community, and employees to customers. But the funny thing is about Mark is he came to I DM'd him being like, hey, talk to me. He didn't, we didn't really connect. And then he came to an event. And then, by the way, then he comes to, and then I was like, hey, come to this event in New York. And then he becomes an advisor. And now he's, I just went to this employee experience council that he invited me to in Austin last week. So there is value, business value, but like it only transpired after we built a relationship and he talked, you know what I mean?
Well, it's like when you tried to cold email him or cold outreach him.
Yeah.
He didn't respond, right? And then you like build an authentic relationship.
But I provided value to him, which is like, hey, he was like, this was a valuable experience.
Yeah.
I met people.
I heard someone say once that like community is almost like community gives the promise or like delivers on the promise that content marketing said it was going to give. Like the original idea of content marketing was like, give someone value, they'll find your website, then they'll buy your product. And then content marketing became an SEO, like, fucking garbage rush to the bottom. And community is like that principle, right? It's like give people value, build the relationship, the benefit will come out of it. My favorite thing is I always talk about how community or go-to-network, whatever you want to call it, is like not binary in outcomes, and it compounds on itself. So direct go-to-market, like if I stop making cold calls, the system just stops. If I stop paying for ads, it just stops, right? Yeah. And it doesn't compound, right? Like I call you and you buy, it's like, yeah, maybe you'll refer a friend if the product's great and whatnot, but like there's not like a direct compounding from the cold call or the cold outreach. And if I try to cold call you, it's binary. Either it's closed won or it's closed lost. Like that's how a CRM is set up, right? There's literally only two outcomes. You buy or you don't buy. With community, like I forget his name, the guy you just mentioned. But Mark. Like he didn't buy your product, but he became an advisor, right? So the community led to a different positive outcome that wasn't like closed won or closed lost. And he's probably referred more people to you, right? So it's like that compounds on itself where each member brings more members in, which drives more engagement, which brings more value. Even if every member doesn't buy from you, they still provide value to the network that they're a part of around you.
You know what's so funny is like I'll just think about it in the context of Marco because so we do paid as one of our go-to-market strategies, right? And we have a growth guy. I spent a lot of time on this because I worked in consulting and finance, and my brain can work in that category of things, which is like, here are all the steps. Let's optimize these steps, and then if it works, then we can like put more money into it, which is fine, by the way. But to your point, it is very measurable. It's very competitive, and you can't really fully bring a customer along to be like, I give a shit like about what you're doing. And then community is way harder, right? So it's nebulous. It's like, it's a long game because you can't actually actively, because like, we'll be like, okay, well, what was the metric after this event? And it's actually really hard to tell because sometimes, and we also work with this company. It's like a cohort-based founder community. And I met the woman who runs that community before she joined, and she went to one of the events, and then that was a relationship. But then we have so then it's just interesting to think about because it's less scientific.
Well, yeah, and like I say, like it compounds on itself. You can't measure it all. It's those outcomes. It's the fact that like people might become advisors, they might become employees, they might become ambassadors, they might become customers, but like
advocates.
There's all these things that fall out of it where it's like you create this flywheel of community and just like the benefits just kind of spin off of it.
So you still believe in
the good network thing. I think the word community from a business perspective, it's just a really dangerous, fuzzy, nebulous word where people go, okay, community, that sounds cool. Community-led growth, that sounds cool. But what do you mean by community? Is this community? Is that community? Like, do you mean this? Do you mean that? And it's kind of one of the things that stuck out to me when we were going through this transition at Commsor was I read this article, and it's like 3 years old now, but it was comparing Qualtrics and SurveyMonkey.
Yeah.
Both started around the same time. Both built pretty much the same product. And it was like at the time of the article, one was worth $10 billion, one was worth $1 billion. And they were looking at like the home pages, like SurveyMonkey was like survey.
Yeah.
Qualtrics didn't say survey anywhere. And it's because like survey, just like, you're like, oh, survey, Google form, cheap. That's where your brain goes, right? It's like there is this thing of like words have power and where people like anchor themselves to. So I believe in the power of community. I don't know if I believe in like the category creation of community-led growth, because I think the work done to define that creates more harm than good.
Well, I think one of my observations is this is an external observation, but there's a category, community-led growth, and my impression is you sold to community managers, right? Is that fair?
Yeah.
And I've talked about this. There's another company kind of in your space, but I feel like everyone has their own community, right? Your sales team might have a community of prospects that actually like are now customers, and now they retain customers, and they give a shit about that person and that company rather than just like the transactional relationship they have. You might have a community of folks that like aren't yet customers but care about your mission, right? You have your company, which is in and of itself a community. So like, I guess our pitch is like everything is community.
Well, that's why we ended up on this idea of network. It's like lots of overlapping networks, some that get defined as community, some that don't.
So have you heard of Sam Korkos? Don't worry if you haven't. He's a CEO of Levels, which is like this.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah. So Levels. This is a tangent, but Levels. We use this company called Athena, which is they're folks in the Philippines, and they're like super vetted. They market them as EAs, but we use them for everything, right? Which is another slight tangent. I'm a huge advocate, and I'm talking about it right now because I'm advocate, right? Like because I'm part of their kind of community. But Sam has like 20 of the folks that he's gotten from Athena, and he talks about network theory in this podcast with Tim Ferriss, and he talks about the eigenvector theory, which is like around network theory, and he's like, it's better to have basically a bunch of weak ties in some respects than like small group of small ties. So like if you're the mayor of a town, that might be less powerful than if you're like someone who knows all these, like Lattice has 20,000 people, and they're not like in their living room every day, but they're spread out, and those people might know so many other people.
Yep.
I don't know what you.
I mean, I would say that is basically the principle that our entire company is now built on.
Really?
Yeah.
So you should write a piece on the eigenvector.
I never heard. It's the first time I've heard that.
He's like a super. He's a big productivity guy, so he's like big into documentation. And I've like sent him an email once, and he like sent me like he's like
it's like an essay back.
Super smart guy, but I think you should chat with him on the eigenvector.
I'll look
because
him up.
part of it is like you have a company, and then within that's a community, and then you have all these nodes within that community, and they might.
Well, that's what I'm saying. It's like if you think about the CRM example, right? It's like traditionally in sales, you're like, I want to sell to this person, so I'm like, that's my single vector. I'm going to try to sell to that person. But in reality, it's like there's networks and nodes around it, some that are strong, some that are weak, but it's like the world is not a single connection. And we've like, I think so much of sales and marketing has, and just like, I don't know, growth and all that in general has like been built on this premise of like this single measurable thing.
Yeah.
I want to sell to this person. I want to take an ad out and this person will see it. It's like, it's single directional always.
Yeah. I guess one of my observations too is like people just at the end of the day, even though technology has permeated everything, are still human beings and they care deeply about connection.
Yeah.
Right. And so whether that's in the context for us around like your immediate company or your customers, people want to have, I think it's more healthy to have nodes still imply like they're going to go perhaps be advocates for you. So I think building that connection is more fruitful than just like viewing it as a one-to-one.
Well, it's like, I think with things like, like the idea of like 6 degrees of separation, right? It's like if you go 6 degrees out from you, you know everyone in the world. Like, yeah, there might be 8 billion people.
Yeah, exactly. That's the point.
The world's not that big, actually. Like when you think about it from that perspective, it's pretty wild. And then if you think about
not to do a company workshop for you, but you're like, hey, if you frame that, you're like, hey, I can just go
and that's the whole world. Imagine we're like, now let's just think about the network of the part of the world that is your target customers.
Yeah.
You don't need 6 degrees. You need like 2 degrees to get to basically like every single person you would ever in your million years hope to sell to.
Which you see on LinkedIn, by the way, which is fascinating because you're like, oh, now I have more and more actual.
So LinkedIn's a shit measure of do you actually know someone? But
for sure. No, that's 100% true. But if that's actually an interesting point, if you were able to be like, I actually have a relationship with this person, which is perhaps what you are.
Mean, we may or may not do that.
Yeah. So that's super interesting because then you're like, okay, cool. How do I go to my actual connections and nurture those connections and give more value to them?
Do you know Dunbar's number?
Yes.
The idea that it's like
you're only like,
you can only maintain about
really
150 meaningful relationships in your head.
Okay, yeah.
And it's like other people have done studies, and some studies say it's 50, some say it's 120, some say it's 150, but typically like Dunbar's number is 150.
How many is it for you?
Can I maintain my head?
Yeah.
Probably less than that, honestly. Like,
really?
I'm shit at that. Like I would say for me it's 40.
Wow.
But
well, hopefully I'm one of them after this.
Yeah, but it's really hard to maintain authentic, meaningful relationships. And I agree that like, having a wide network is important. But like, let's take Lattice again for example. If you have 20,000 people and you just have 20,000 weak connections, that's kind of useless.
Yeah.
But like, so you have to like strategically build strong connections in the right ways and in the right places. And humans are really bad at that.
Yeah.
Like we are just really like, how often like you and I didn't talk for what, like 2.5 years? And the only reason I'm sitting here is because I happened to see a LinkedIn post of yours and be like, oh shit, I haven't spoken to you in forever. I'm going to send you a message. And then we hopped on a call and like,
you know what's
there's
funny
so many things coming
about
out
the
of that.
LinkedIn post is, and this is like why we're even doing this podcast, is like, I don't want to get up here and shill, which I think you use the word shill. It's like, I want to have like real conversations with real people that are humanizing and aren't talking about super tactical things around like, how do you optimize this and that? Might talk about that stuff, but like, I think you just reacted to it because you're like, that's interesting.
Yeah. Well, it also just like triggered a reminder of like, oh shit, like that's someone I would like to have maintained a relationship with, but I haven't done a good job of doing it because we're all busy. Shit happens. Like you move, who knows, right? It's just difficult. And it's like in a professional sense, how often have you done a thing where you're like, oh shit, I need a thing from Mac. Hey Mac, it's been like a year. How's it going? How's life? And you have to like do that weird game of like pretending you want to like, you have to like put that formality in front before you can like be like, hey, I need a thing from you.
You know what's funny? So I think I have this notion around like a couple of things around friendship. Approach every friend as a potential best friend because you never know. Especially as you get older, you have a better barometer of like, oh, do I care about this person? But then the second thing is like real friends are like people who will help you move out of your. Or
I've always had the line that a good friend will bail you out of jail. A great friend will be sitting there next to you.
Yeah, that's great. But where was I going with this? I just think that like the authenticity of like even friend. I know where I'm going with this. It's basically like you have to give back in a friendship, right?
Yeah.
And in a business relationship,
that's the same thing with a community.
Yeah.
Right?
And by the way, like I don't think it's bad or dirty to be like, hey, by the way, hopefully I have a product or service that like you might need at some point. But like if you're only ever asking for that, similar analog from a friend, if you're like, hey, I'm only asking when I have nothing to do and I want to have fun, right? I'm only asking when I know that you're like, connected in some way and like, can you help me out, right?
Yeah. Like that will kill the relationship. I have joined communities, like you join a Slack group and then 30 minutes later you get a DM being like, hey, thanks for joining our community. Like, do you want to book a call to see our product? I'm like, what? No.
Well, honestly, I do that too. And I'm like reflecting on me joining communities and being like, hey, and I just think it's like important because at the end of the day, like
it's like a social capital. You have to give before you can cash out.
Yeah, totally. That's interesting. I'm just like thinking about that because even if you are truly authentic and you're like, okay, cool, I actually want to give to this community, I want to like build it, which we do. You need to be kind of cautious, I feel like.
Yeah, I think that's where it gets tricky. Sometimes people get like concerned, like they don't want to like, you know, ask for the, you know, the sale or the thing too early and or too late. It's like it's a tough balance for sure.
Yeah. Well, maybe like I would love to hear a little bit about this is kind of almost separate but related to community, just like about your founder. We were just talking about like I worked at SoftBank, which is like the pinnacle of perhaps like chaos, overcapitalization of companies, crazy shit happening, all this kind of stuff, right? With regards to the past couple of years as it relates to like venture. You came from a bootstrap kind of company, very different, right? Yeah. Thinking about how do I literally have a profit, I imagine. It's a crazy concept.
The venture world still feels kind of foreign to me, to be honest.
So maybe you want to share a little bit about kind of that experience and like how your company got, to the extent you're comfortable sharing, like what?
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think of like what's most interesting or where to even start. But like I said, it started as a side project, then it was like bootstrapped, and then I brought in a co-founder who then left, but he was like, "Oh, we should apply to YC," and I was like, "I don't want to raise VC money." Like, I was like very.
So you were cautious.
I was very hardcore, like in the bootstrapping world. Like, it took me a long time to be like, we can spend this money that the VCs gave us. It was like it just felt foreign, right? Like coming from a bootstrapper, was like, if I don't make the money, I don't have the money to spend. That's the mentality.
Yeah.
Which, long story short, definitely worked out for us. I think having a balance of that mentality, but. So we went to YC, got the invite to fly out to San Francisco. This was like January 2020, so just before the pandemic shut everything down. So we were like the last batch of like in-person interviews.
Wow.
Got torn to shreds. We're basically told like this is a stupid business. Like go home. We're like, why did you fly us out here? But all right, thanks, I guess. But then I think that got us on like. I'm definitely the kind of person where like you tell me I can't do something, I'm like, you know what? Fuck you. I'm gonna do it now. Just to like.
We love a chip on
I'm
the
like
shoulder.
like. You know, for better or for worse. So I think YC being like, this is a terrible idea, you'll never raise money. I was like, fuck you.
Is that what they said? They're like,
they're like, this is a terrible idea. Like, no one's going to invest in this. Okay, fine. I'm gonna go raise money out of principle now. Like,
yeah.
Spent 6 months trying to raise a pre-seed round. Like, no. Flybridge, who we share as an investor, was actually the first one. Yeah.
Was Jesse Middleton the one who?
Yeah. So they were the first ones to write a check into us after like 6 months of no.
They also invested in Chief, which is successful.
Yeah. They definitely believe in community.
It's actually on their website. It says,
yeah. I've met a lot of VCs who say they believe in community, but they don't really know what it means, but that's a separate rabbit hole. But yeah, so we raised this pre-seed round. It was like $600,000 at like $5 million, something like that. Like a pretty standard. Like this is before the world went chaotic, because it was like right at the tail end of the early pandemic when. People were like, is VC going to freeze? Like, how's the pandemic going to affect the economy? Like, no one really knew. And then, of course, 6 months later, it was like, oh, it means that there's just going to be like a fucking money cannon on every corner. So, like, we raised this pre-seed, started building. And then it was just like, I started a Twitter account. I started a LinkedIn. I didn't like the idea of like, I had no network before Commsor. I didn't have a LinkedIn. I didn't have a Twitter.
Wait, really?
I didn't know fucking anybody in the tech world.
That's amazing. That's almost a blessing.
Like, it's, in a way.
Because there's some people who, I mean, I guess you've learned a lot, but sometimes it's helpful to have.
There was an element I think of like we never followed the playbook for fundraising, which in hindsight I think accidentally created a really good air of FOMO, because it was like I was like, yeah, we're fundraising, I guess, but like if you don't want to give us money, whatever, I don't really care. I'm not gonna like follow this playbook. I didn't have like my investor like CRM or like follow. It's just like, yeah, if you want to give us money, great. Otherwise, like I'm just gonna go back to building, which in hindsight makes an investor go like. I have to give you money now, right? Because like this is just like same thing, like chip on the shoulder. You say don't push the button. They're like, I'm gonna push the button now. So then like the VC market got crazy. Community led became like a thing people were talking about, and I somehow like got thrust to the forefront of like, oh, you hear community, go talk to Mac. You hear community, go talk to Mac. And it was like, okay, which also like early on actually pissed off a lot of community managers who'd been in the industry a lot longer than me. Were like, who the fuck is this guy coming out of nowhere? Like that's showing up on podcasts and stuff. And then basically over the course of the next like year and a half, we got a preemptive seed round, a preemptive A, a second, like an A2 preempted, and then a B round preempted.
And how much money have you raised?
62 million total.
Yeah.
So we
somebody didn't know the playbook.
We tried really hard to raise $500,000, and then another 61.5 basically just showed up. And it's like, it's really weird to say that, given that a lot of founders right now are like, if I could just have an extra million, like I could keep going. But like, and I have a half written blog post that I don't know how to frame it without sounding like an asshole, but like raising that much money almost killed us. Cause it perverted the incentives.
Yeah.
It suddenly you're like, oh, we've raised this money. Okay, I got to be a Series B CEO now. We got to act like a Series B. We got to hire a Series B. Yeah, we hired the VP of sales, who hired the SDR manager, who hired 5 SDRs. And it was like, none of this made sense. Like, if you had gone back before we'd raised any money, like, none of that was in our identity as a company, right? Like, we were just like building a community, building a product, like, and like those two things were very symbiotic. But suddenly all this money was like, got to make a shit ton of money, and like it actually like it kind of hurt the community a little bit, and it hurt that symbioticness that I talked about earlier.
By the way, just tactically for people who don't know, if you raise $60 million, your company has to be worth more than $60 million in order for so it's not
a lot more.
A lot more.
Yeah,
because they get
it's
the
a
money
lot
first,
of pressure.
right?
It's a lot of pressure.
There's something called a preference stack, right?
Yeah,
so.
And it's luckily I think we did overhire a little bit, but not as badly as a lot of companies did.
Yeah.
I think because of that like bootstrapping background, I was always like, yeah, but like do we really like we'd VCs being like, you got to hire like 100 more people. Like you have the money. And we're like, but we don't need 100 people. Like, what are you talking about? So there's like a year and a half of like just growing pains of like, we didn't know who we were as a company.
But by the way, just an observation on that. It's like a company is a living, breathing community. And I do think that, I mean, think about like Hopin, right? And that was even scale. Like there was metrics.
Side note on Hopin. I wish someone had told me that secondaries were a thing before we raised money, but whatever. That would have been helpful.
Oh gosh, that's another separate topic. But no, but like
maybe not 180 million worth.
Yeah, but I think just expanding your community that aggressively, I imagine dilutes the.
Well, it's like a community also like can have negative network effects, right? It's like, and it's a great. I mean, like speaking of like Chief from earlier. Like, I know there's been topics about that where it's like, can a community that's venture backed scale infinitely the way a venture backed company should? It's like, not really. Like that's also the thing. Like I always get founders like, okay, I want to start a community. Like, how many members should I have? It's like, I don't know. Like I've seen communities that are 50 people that drive so much value. I've seen communities of 10,000 people that are fucking ghost towns.
Do you remember Lunch Club?
Yeah.
So for those of you who don't know, Lunch Club I was living in San Francisco at that time, and it was like, basically, you joined, and it was a very simple model. Yeah. I don't think it should be VC funded, but there's elements.
Well, VC funding screwed it up.
Yeah, who knows? I mean, there's another topic around like what should be VC funded.
Separate podcast.
But point is like it. Basically, they connected you with people to go to lunch with.
Yeah.
Right. And so it was amazing initially because I met some super cool people through Lunch Club, but then the issue is it then grew a lot, and then the community got diluted.
Yeah,
right.
And like the quality of the connections went down.
Well, then it wasn't also meeting in person, so I would be like, I'm on Zoom calls all day.
Then the pandemic hit.
Yeah,
so
do I want to get on another Zoom call with a stranger that is like not necessarily super relevant for the type of person I want to meet with? But it used to be amazing. Yeah, actually, I don't know if you ever used it, but
yeah, I did. I remember using it. I think I only ever used it virtually. No, that's not true. End of 2019, I did use it for a few in-person meetings in New York.
Yeah, I met some super cool.
Yeah.
In fact, one of the guys that Flybridge invested in, he was my last in-person meeting, Elliot Popple.
Oh, I know Elliot. Yeah.
Small.
Yeah.
There
you go.
I think okay. So we've chatted for a bit. I think maybe to round off, kind of like, what are your favorite communities? Maybe I know that Alexis Ohanian is an investor of y'all's 776 Reddit. Like, maybe that's any community. It doesn't have to be a business that is like your favorite. Maybe like favorite one or two. Or most interesting.
Most interesting. That's a good question. Don't know if I have a good answer.
Yeah.
I have a bit of a non-answer, but
perfect.
So I think this is kind of going back to like, size of community isn't what's important and all that. There's a community builder who did a poll like 6 months ago being like, hey, over the next year, like what kind of community are you more likely to join? And it was like, a sub 50 person small group, there's like, like the different sizes of community. And I remember seeing that poll and I was like, 50% of people are going to say a small group. People don't want the big community.
What was the
82% said sub 50 person community.
Really?
Yeah. Because I think community just became such especially in like the B2B side, every company was like, community, join my Slack. It's like,
and you're like, I'm on a fucking million Slack.
Yeah, no one wants to be in another one. So it's like the communities I've gotten the most value out of. I'm a huge fan right now of Hampton.
I'm a member and we work with them. That was the woman I was talking about. We're there you go. Doing their retreats. Yeah.
Which also like the person who runs their community now, who might be who
Jessica.
Yeah. So she was also she was one of our first she was one of our first customers as well, back
Really?
when she was like head of community and platform at Company Ventures.
This is literally the person.
So see, 6 degrees, like of separation. The world's really not that big.
Exactly. Be nice to everyone. Be nice to everyone.
Yeah. Hampton's great. But a lot of the communities that I get the most value out of right now are small, not publicly advertised, like communities that don't even have names.
Yeah. You know, I'll tell you just a quick two communities. So I have my co-founder Nick, who is a friend, also super fun. He DJs for our events. He's a DJ. One of my good friends, Delphine, and her partner Curtis, who's the CEO of Pinwheel, which is like this B2B API company. We started doing events, and in New York, I think you're inundated with social events, some of which don't create a lot of joy or value in your life. So we started this thing. We named it the second event, City Circle, where you just like basically we're getting together friends. That's a super nascent one. But for me, I was like, okay, I really want community in my life, because separately, I think humans they thrive and crave community. But you have religion being on the decline. Workplace that's what we're trying to solve, which is like it's harder to build authentic community in the workplace. And you used to go to your, when I was,
to be fair, not that offices were authentic community in the first place, but
that's fair. Well, you're a big remote guy, right? We'll actually end on that note. But no, but so when I was a kid, we used to go around our neighborhood and give fudge to everyone for Christmas. We don't even celebrate Christmas, but my mom, being Indian and very into kind of family, community, hospitality,
still wanted to be a part of it.
Yeah, so we would do that, and I don't think people do that kind of stuff anymore. So I feel like people are craving kind of community just as a human. So I have a few personal communities, including one where we go on these like retreats in Mexico. I just went to Ibiza for this like wellness retreat, and that's a community as well. Those are my favorite communities.
Yeah,
actually.
people talk a lot about like the missing third places in cities, and like the rise. Like there's been a rise of like, at least in New York, there's a lot of I don't know, at least 2 or 3 startups that are like trying to build like modern social clubs, like membership clubs, like
this.
Yeah, well, we're like, but not like Soho House, but like smaller, more intimate. Like there's also one like in Copenhagen. There's a sauna. I mean, we wouldn't call it a community, but a club that's like, it's called Glacier, and it's like there can only be 4 members at a time, and you pay, and it's like you get access to a sauna, but also they do events and things, and it's like it becomes a lot more than just like, it's not like you're paying for a gym membership. There is this like connected piece to it.
Totally. Well, so maybe we will round out on like your own community at work, right? I think you're distributed.
Yeah,
like
yeah.
Maybe
we're in like
size to Marco, but
I think we're in like 12 countries now.
Yeah. And how do you build that community? What are the challenges, opportunities?
I think at the stage that we're at, the best sense of community for an early stage startup comes from just like building cool shit together. Honestly, like, you want to be in a boat where you want to know the guy next to you is rowing as hard as you are.
Totally.
Like, that's the number one thing that drives camaraderie and connection and shared interest and whatnot. And I think if you're sub 30 people and you're hiring people who are like, well, what are we going to do for community? It's like, that should maybe not be the primary focus of the day-to-day conversation. Because I don't think community or culture is a thing you add into a company. It's like how you do the things that you do anyways.
Yeah.
So from a remote perspective, I'm a huge fan of get together tactically for the right reasons. Like, know why you're getting together. I think a lot of companies get together like, oh, we need to build culture. Let's get people together. But it's like,
they don't think about it.
Like you said before, like with these social events in New York, you're like, but like, what is the purpose? Like, why did I go to this event? Like, what's the thing? So like, we do things where our product team gets together in person for a few days every quarter. We do like the super in-depth plan together. Like last time we did like an escape room together. So a little bit of social, a little bit of planning, some of that messy open-ended work. And then we go back to being remote for a quarter.
But there's like business objectives you're like, we're going to like crack this product.
Yeah, it's like the open-ended stuff for like, it's like the open-ended, and like we still do that. We do the nice dinners, we do the escape room together, we'll go on the boat tour together or whatever. So it's like, it's a mix.
But you're doing like a product
things.
jam session, or you're doing something.
Yeah. So it's like, I think it's like, there's like these tactile moments, or like, yesterday I just did a co-working session because 3 of our team are in New York. Well, actually 2 of our team are in New York. One of them is from Norway and just happened to be in New York at the same time I was. So we're just like, yeah, let's all just get together. And we weren't working together. We're all working on separate things. We just get together, have that in-person time, get shit done together.
Yeah, well, I think that's a great way to end it. Epic. I mean, this is the first time we've met in person. So.
Yeah. Well, that's another rabbit hole to go down.
Yeah. All right. Well, I appreciate you making the time, and
Thanks for having me.
learned a lot, honestly, during this conversation. So that's great.
It was a lot of fun.